And I apologize, but now comes another issue, and I will try to be quick about it. So the issue that we're going to discuss now during my reports is a presentation regarding 3 current ethics complaints that have been filed. There's one ethics complaint with respect to Jack Fox, and there are 2, one with respect to Deputy Mayor Weinroth and one with respect to Deputy City Manager George Brown. There are 2 categories. They're all related to the airport and related to service on the airport and or appointment on the airport. So they all have a connection to the airport authority. But the one that was filed against Mr. Weinroth and Mr. Brown are the same. They are one complaint. It has to do with the recent appointments that the council made of Mr. Weinroth and Mr. Brown to the airport authority. And as you already know, because you've received a lot of material from me, with respect to Mr. Fox, there was an ethics complaint that was filed after the city had sought on his behalf a request for a formal advisory opinion. Okay. So having said that, I'm going to just talk very briefly about what the standards are that apply.
Now we're going to split that conversation to 3 parts or 2?
We are going to split it to 3 parts when it goes time to get some direction. I'm going to talk generally, and then at the end, I'm going to ask for direction from the council. Mr. Weinroth is jumping ahead to say I am going to suggest that I'm going to advise him that he is not going to vote on the one with respect to himself, but he is eligible to vote for the other 2.
Thank you.
But I'll wait until after I get my discussion out. Okay. And I'm also going to suggest that I'm going to give some general information. I think it would be appropriate at that time to take a comment from Mr. Zuccaro or anybody else who would like to give it. And then any follow-up discussion would be had after that, and I can answer any further questions at that point. Okay. To give a brief overview, essentially, as you know, the State Commission on Ethics is a state agency. They are established through state statute, and they have provisions and procedures that apply to them. They have several functions. I don't know about their primary. They have, let's say, dual functions. One is to give direction and to interpret and apply the statute so that officials have direction and understand how to comply without violating any ethics codes. And the way that they do that is by issuance of formal opinions. The Commission is an established body. They hear opinions. They are submitted. It can only be made by an official. An official submits the facts and circumstances. They have a staff. The staff prepares a recommendation. It's considered during a public meeting of the Commission on Ethics. The Commission on Ethics either accepts the recommendations of its staff or does not. And issues a formal opinion which gives guidance to that official how to comply with the law. Those decisions, like all other government decisions, are appealable to the courts, but the formal decision of the Commission on Ethics is without appeal, an action interpreting the state statute. Those are also published opinions, and therefore officials, as you know, whenever an issue comes up, what your lawyers do is we look back at all the other opinions that have previously been issued, and just like case law, the opinions taken together give guidance and interpretation of what a particular statute means, what exemptions mean, what provisions mean. Okay. With respect to Mr. Fox, an issue had the attorney for the airport authority received some type of information which led her to believe that there was an issue she had to investigate over whether or not Mr. Fox's service on the airport authority was appropriate or potentially in some way in conflict with the ethics provisions. She reviewed that and requested what's called an informal opinion from the Commission on Ethics. An informal opinion is not a binding opinion. It is an opinion issued by the staff, and it's essentially a way to get informal direction. It's obviously much more simple than submitting and being placed on an agenda and full consideration by the formal Commission on Ethics, and therefore it of course has lesser precedential value. However, she did go and provide some facts to the staff of the Commission on Ethics, who issued an informal opinion, and I'm happy to go into more details should you want, but I have provided a lot of information already, that concluded that his service was inconsistent, that it was a violation for him to serve. It wasn't a question of a specific voting conflict, not a particular matter for which he had to recuse himself or didn't have to recuse himself. It was about whether he can serve. And the general scope of that, and again, I'm not purporting here to give all the details, but is based on the fact that he owns a hangar at the airport for his personal use, not for business operation, and that and some other related facts to that role. We, as you know, wrote a 12-page, very detailed request for opinion to the Commission on Ethics requesting a formal opinion because, based on our review, that initial informal opinion by the staff was, in my opinion, not consistent with the statute and all the former Commission on Ethics opinions that had been issued. And we spent 12 single-space pages with small font laying out why we believe that that was so. We cited extensive authority to prior Commission on Ethics opinions as well as prior cases, which we believe support the fact that that was not a correct conclusion, that in fact his interests are not incompatible with his service on the Commission on Ethics. That was received by the Commission on Ethics. They also requested some supplemental information, which we also provided. Thereafter, it was scheduled for June 5th, which was next week, to be heard by the formal Commission on Ethics. Before, about a week ago, I'm sorry that I don't have the exact date, but about a week ago, a complaint was filed against Mr. Fox. That complaint was based on the same underlying facts as our request for opinion. Okay. At that point, we were informed that the staff would not place the item on June 5th for a request for opinion, but would proceed with the complaint process. And this is as good a time as any to tell you that the complaint process is unfortunately a very long and extended process. It is not an expedited, a month or two resolution. It is a multi-month, many month process. The commission goes in order of the complaints they receive, I presume, but I know it takes quite a bit of time. They assign an investigator. They have to assess and investigate, and it's a very drawn-out process, a long process, not an expedited process. So that is issue number one. Once that complaint was filed, essentially the official is left in the position of not receiving guidance. And so we are seeking to address that issue in two ways. We are, number one, seeking to see if we can, in fact, expedite the request for formal opinion, because we think that is the proper way to address the issue, especially since the complaint is based on the same underlying facts. Secondly, we are seeking to procedurally see if we can have the Commission on Ethics review. There is no formal procedure that says that they can't consider the request for opinion when the complaint is filed, so we're seeking to take those efforts. In order to do that, it is my recommendation that we retain counsel in Tallahassee to further those efforts, to represent Jack's interest as the city of Boca Raton has elected to do it essentially on Mr. Fox's behalf. The reason for that, and I'm just going to give you the basic legal standard, is that the law allows the city and any governmental entity essentially to defend against ethics complaints and essentially pay for the defense if the complaint does two things. There's two prongs to the requirement. One is that it arises out of or is in connection with the performance of the official duties of the city official, the employee, or the appointee. In this case, it's an appointee. And two, it's while serving a public purpose. In light of the facts and circumstances related to the Jack Fox issue, and again, as laid out in great detail in our 12-page request for formal opinion, I believe that there's no question that those prongs are met. And therefore, I, in my capacity as the city attorney, believe that the appropriate function is to proceed to defend that complaint that's been filed against Mr. Fox. I am bringing it to the council so that the council can advise if they disagree with my assessment and if they do not want me to take those actions. Barring a motion directing me to do something different, I will proceed with that defense. I believe that the standard has been met. I think it's appropriate. And having brought it to the council, I think it's how the city should proceed. So why don't we deal with that one first? So is there any question or is there any desire to give me direction inconsistent with my intent, which is to proceed to retain counsel to defend the issues that Mr. Fox is facing with respect to the complaint?
Mr. Singer.
I just wanted to see if anyone from the public wanted to comment on this particular issue.
Yes, thank you, because I was going to do it all together. That's good. Thank you.
We can do one at a time.
Yes. Welcome,
Mr. Zuccaro. Can we have your name and address, please?
Again?
Yeah.
I can't remember the zip code, so I'll just...
It's okay.
Al Zuccaro, 561 Golden Harbor Drive. Part of what I want to say tonight can capture all three of the issues. So some of what I'll say right now deals with that, with an overall. The applicant, Jack Fox, applied for a position as an individual. Hence, all three applicants applied for the position as individuals. And they put themselves out there to participate as individuals and then were accepted by this body as the representative from the city on the airport authority. They acted as individuals, and they should be responsible for their actions as individuals. The use of taxpayer money to defend an individual, I find troubling. Now, whether I find it inappropriate, illegal, in violation of some ethics code, I didn't know that this was going to be an item on the agenda until somebody called me tonight to tell me, because I wasn't here when this first started. So regardless of, my comment in general is, the individuals need to defend themselves. Spending taxpayer money to defend them, I believe it is inappropriate. And I would certainly ask that you not take that action. But if you choose to move forward with that action, I don't think that you should take that action tonight. I think that you should put that out there for the public to comment on and bring it in as an item at the next regularly scheduled city council meeting and hear what others might have to say about the proposition. As noted by the city attorney, this process isn't going to end tomorrow. It's going to be quite a time before then. So a delay of 2 weeks or 3 weeks to allow for public comment, for this to be brought forward as an item on the city agenda, is not going to cause irreparable harm in any stretch of the imagination. I actually don't understand why the city attorney has moved forward with the request for a formal opinion to refute the informal opinion. Again, I believe that's the responsibility of the individual. And that's the comment I'll make at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Zakar. We appreciate your comments. However, I will say that this council directed the city attorney to request the formal opinion on behalf of our appointee, Mr. Fox. So that's, now you're done. Deanna, would you like to continue?
Yes, but I will also just point out for the record that while I did say that the process takes a long time, I did not say that it hasn't begun and that there is not things that can be done early, because the procedures, there are certain initial determinations that will start happening quickly. So I have to take issue with the fact that just because it will take a long time and may be drawn out means that there aren't things that need to be done quickly. So that is why I would go forward. So as to the next issues, I'm going to discuss them together, and then I'm going to suggest that we take votes separately.
Okay.
And essentially, and again, for the record, I don't need to repeat it, the standard is the same. The issue here, even, I'm sorry.
I'm going to recuse myself
That's
from this
fine.
conversation.
Not a problem. The standard here is the standard is exactly the same. It's even, I don't want to say even more, because I think the issue with Mr. Fox is, obviously I have written many an analysis that says I think that it's proper. That doesn't mean, that, as everybody likes to say, have different lawyers, you'll get different opinions. But I have put my analysis in writing. I have put my citations to law in writing, and I have received no responses that counter any of those. And that, to me, does speak for something. In the same way, the second issue, which is the complaint that was filed by Mr. Zaccaro against Deputy Mayor Weinroth and Deputy City Manager George Brown, they are identical complaints, meaning it's the same complaint filed against both parties, and they go to the issues that that Mr. Zaccaro has raised, either prior issues or in his letter, and for which I have done research and issued memoranda to the mayor and council, again, going through each of the issues of which that I am aware. Having just received the complaint yesterday, I believe yesterday, there is nothing in that complaint that has not already been addressed by the memorandums and the research that we've already done. And I can only point out to the council that I am far from perfect, and I'm always open to additional issues that we haven't considered or other aspects. However, again, none of our citations of law, none of the assessment that was provided in those memorandums, which have been released, and I know Mr. Zaccaro has those, or to any other party, have been disputed, countered, nor have I even heard a counter argument. So it's difficult for me to say that the actions were improper in any way when I've done that analysis, I've provided you with memorandum, and no issue other than some policy concerns about whether that should be the right process. That is not what the Commission on Ethics or my opinions focus on. My opinions focus on the legality of the process, and that, I believe, is the proper forum. The Commission on Ethics is not a forum to decide policy issues. It's a forum to decide compliance with the ethics rules. And again, if there was an issue that perhaps I had concluded incorrectly or some legal precedent that I was unaware of, I certainly would have brought that to the Council's attention. Those have not been brought to my attention, nor to, at this point, the Commission on Ethics' attention, so I can only stand in my same position. And based on that, I have to say that, again, I believe that there's simply no argument that the two prongs are met, which is that the action was in performance of their duties, which is to offer to serve on behalf of the council as appointees on a board that the council has authority to appoint over, and it's to serve a public purpose. So again, it is my suggestion that the council, in this case, we didn't have a formal opinion pending. We simply received the complaint that was filed by Mr. Zuccaro. I would recommend that we defend these public officials. I believe that is the appropriate action, especially based on the opinions and no counter-legal positions. So I have concluded those prongs are met, and again, unless I hear counter direction from the City Council, I will commence to retain counsel to defend those two complaints that have been filed.
Mr. Zuccaro, would you like to provide public comment on this issue?
Thank you. Al Zuccaro, 561 Golden Harbor Drive, Boca Raton, Florida. I filed the complaints. The complaints are supposed to be confidential until they're not confidential. The first process that's going to take place is that the complaints are going to have some analysis done to see if there's legal sufficiency. That argument, that finding has not been made yet. If there's no legal sufficiency, then the complaint becomes public and the item is closed at the city, up in Tallahassee. If there is legal sufficiency, then the process continues and it goes on to a determination as to whether there's probable cause, and investigators assigned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know about the complaint against Jack Frost. That's not my complaint. I didn't file it. I don't know what stage that's in, but I suspect that that's in a similar stage. So to the issue of timing, I mean, waiting 2 weeks is not going to affect a question as to whether we probably don't even have a legal sufficiency finding within the next 2 weeks. And spending city taxpayer money to defend individuals. I mean, the city attorney characterized this as complaints filed against the city council member and the deputy city manager. They were not. They were filed against Mr. Weinroth and Mr. Brown, period. Okay? They happen to be a city councilman and a deputy city manager. And the basis of the complaint, I have no obligation to respond to the city attorney's analysis, so I didn't respond to the city attorney's analysis. I have only the obligation to file the complaint and wait for the Commission on Ethics to participate or to follow through. That's what I've done. I've been inquired by the press with regards to the letter that I sent to the council putting you on notice that I filed a complaint. My comments to the press are, I do not intend to litigate this in the newspaper. I do not intend to litigate this in these chambers. If this has to be litigated, it should be litigated by the Florida Department Commission on Ethics. The fact of the matter is that it is clearly a questionable item to appoint a city manager who operates at the pleasure of the deputy city manager who operates at the pleasure of the city manager. Okay, his livelihood depends on him taking an action. How in any capacity could he have an independent thought process to act on that board, independent of his actions for the city? And the city council person, similar argument. But litigating it in this chamber is not to anybody's advantage, yours or mine. I'm not going to win it in this chamber. I don't want to go toe-to-toe with the city attorney. I don't have a staff that's going to do all the research. But I will react to the Florida Commission on Ethics and what they have to say. If they find legal sufficiency, the process will continue. But my comment here tonight is, who should pay for this? And if this is going to be paid for, it should be paid for by the individuals that put themselves in the hot seat, and not by the taxpayers of the city of Boca Raton.
Thank you, Mr. Zuccaro. We appreciate your comments. Ms. Fraser.
I appreciate that we are not going to litigate the issue here, and I would agree with that. I guess I just feel the need to respond to a few quick things. Obviously, Mr. Zaccaro has made my point about the determination about legal sufficiency and why time is of the essence. So I don't. He's made the point, which is exactly that is what happens immediately. That is the first step, and therefore I don't think it's appropriate to wait. Second, the issue of confidentiality, just to be clear, obviously if it was a confidentiality issue, then Mr. Zaccaro would not have been able to send the letter notifying of the filing of the complaint and the substance of the complaint. The confidentiality statutes restrict the Commission on Ethics and its staff, but obviously it doesn't restrict Mr. Zaccaro, or he would not have been able to provide that letter or this discussion. And again, it may be a reference back at several years ago. There used to be a statute on point. In fact, I myself looked it up because I didn't remember what the state of it was when we received these complaints initially, that did limit a much broader spectrum of people from discussing the existence or the filing of a confidentiality of the complaint due to confidentiality. But a court several years ago struck those provisions. So it doesn't, they do not, they only apply to the Commission on the staff. So that's what the statute provides.
Okay, Mr. Singer.
Madam Chair, I just have a question on that last comment.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the party who is the subject of the complaint or the complainant can share that information? It doesn't have to be kept confidential?
As Mr. Zaccaro has. He wrote you a letter saying he filed a complaint, which itself used to be subject to confidentiality. You used to not be acknowledged. In fact, if you call the Commission on Ethics, their staff will not acknowledge the filing until a later process, as Mr. Zaccaro points out. But if the complainant, who years ago used to be subject to that confidentiality, then he would have violated, as would we. Those provisions don't apply. The confidentiality does not bind us, as it didn't bind him. So that's why the statute provides. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions of the city
are
attorney?
you unsure about what I've said, or should I provide more information? I mean, the statute was amended.
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
was just, given that there's only one, I would want to see if the chair would entertain just letting Mr. Zaccaro respond on one point here, because it's a unique situation where we have someone who's the complainant and commenting on it, and I was very curious as to what that last point was. Only if that's
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Because I
We
also
want to-
I know no one wants to litigate it, but it seemed that there was one last point.
My understanding is that the council, the Ethics Commission cannot comment. And the only one that can waive confidentiality as to the content of the complaint is the person that the complaint is made against. There's no restriction on me being able to speak to the issue.
Perfect.
And I spoke to the issue. I put you on notice that I filed it. I thought that was an appropriate thing to do. But I have not spoken to the content of the complaint. The only one that can waive that confidentiality is the person that the complaint is made, as my understanding of the Commission on Ethics.
All right, thank
Would
you.
you like to
Mr.
respond?
No, I wouldn't. I
Okay.
just wanted to thank the chair for the indulgence there, because it helped me understand the point
Yeah.
better, because
Sure.
I'll have a discussion. Thank you.
Okay. But, okay, there's nothing that was wrong. What I said, that the only thing that's different is the waiver of the person who is the subject of the complaint goes to the staff of the Commission on Ethics, and the Commission on Ethics itself. It doesn't go to third parties, right, as evidenced by the other documents. And I guess the only other thing I would say to that is, regardless of what forum this is going to be discussion, the Commission on Ethics, like courts, make new law all the time. But as public officials, of which you are all public officials, I am a public official, Mr. Arnell is a public official, as public officials, the only thing we can be guided by is the existing law and the existing Commission on Ethics opinions. And that is why my analysis, while I certainly don't expect anybody to, if somebody believes that I am wrong in my analysis, it is appropriate to raise that. And all I can say is that we've performed, as is evidenced by those memorandum, very thorough analyses. There's no other issues that I can turn or change. And so I simply have no choice but to advise the council that there simply isn't another legal opinion. That does not mean that the Commission on Ethics or a court of law may not create new law in the future. And we will all await and see if that happens. But what we can only rely on as officials from a day-to-day, and we function in the operations we take, the decisions that we make, are the Commission on Ethics opinions and the law that is created through the date hereof. And that's what I've cited in my memorandum. So again, I'm just going to point out that unless I hear anything different in the other direction, I do intend to retain counsel on behalf of those two complainants.
Well, I'd like to speak, if I may, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
Mr. Singer.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to some of the concerns Mr. Zaccaro raised. I'm only going by what Mr. Zaccaro put in his letter to the council about the appointments of Mr. Brown and Mr. Weinroth, not the ethics complaint. That's why we're talking about this subject confidentiality, but I'm going to assume, it's probably a fair assumption based on some of the comments that Mr. Zuccaro made, that the subject matter is the same. I think the subject matter there was that you have a city, what was just said here, you have a city employee and a city official being appointed to the board. They actually haven't taken office yet, so it's hard for me. I have to say that I don't think this is an individual act, such as, someone did something wrong for financial benefit or, abrogated their duties. They haven't even served yet. The basis of the complaint seems to be that they wear a hat tied to the city. That is the definition of official in my mind, so that's why I think it's appropriate. And as for Mr. Fox, the city's already given direction to go with a formal opinion. Part and parcel, the ethics complaint is part of that. It traverses the same ground. It's based on the same substance. It seems, again, eminently appropriate to have for counsel to be paid for in this instance. This was a city employee, and from what I understand from the informal opinion, again, there were no questions about some side dealings or anything of the nature. It was the fact that he was a city employee and had other issues going. Just that the appointee, the fact that he's an appointee makes it relevant.
I think you inadvertently said employee. You meant appointee.
Appointee, I did.
Yes.
Thank you.
No.
Yes, but thank you. So yes, I'm fine with the city attorney's direction there.
Okay, is there anyone else that has any?
Well, I would just
Question, Mr. Millay.
concur with that. If we made the appointment, it is true that Mr. Fox came and actually actually all of the appointees did apply, did put themselves out as willing to serve, and we certainly want to encourage people to be willing to serve, and that is certainly one of many. I mean, we have an obligation, I think, anyway, but we certainly want to encourage people to come forward and be willing to serve, and part of that is in saying that, yes, if there's some sort of a complaint that's based on us having appointed you, we will defend that position.
Thank you, Mr. Millay. Mr. Rogers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Zuccaro for raising this up. I think if he has a legitimate concern with this, it's good to send this up and to have it fleshed out, that thing. I certainly give 100% support and continuing to support this. We've had our internal legal look at this and find that we haven't, we continue to think we're right. So I think it's important to continue to do this. And as pointed out by other council members, this isn't individual acts that any of these three members have committed. It's just supposed role conflict. So I think we're defending our appointee decision, not actions that they've committed. And then to Mr. Moulet's comment, I think it's, couldn't be more important for us to use our money to defend our appointees if we think they're the right people. I mean, if we allowed any challenge to an appointee on an ethics commission to remove that appointee from a board, then we would very quickly run out of willing servants to our city, because I wouldn't be willing to put my own money up there and take that chance on there, and I don't think any logical person would. The risk reward for a citizen to serve in that aspect never exists. So I think it's proper use of our resources, and given the delay that's caused by it, I think it's proper use of resources right now.
Great. Thank you so very much. And I certainly agree that we are defending our active appointment, not the individuals themselves. So, and I think it's important that we preserve that. Mr. Singer.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to close, which, I have seen this in other instances, and it seems rather commonplace that officials acting in their capacity or by virtue of the nature of their official appointment are routinely indemnified and represented at city expense. It's regrettable that, any expense has to be incurred, of course, but there's expense for everything. And this seems an appropriate expense for all the reasons already discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So do you have your direction?
I do, and I'm happy to say I have no further reports.